Hello and welcome to another episode of Locked on Wolves. Today on the show, previewing Wolves-Knicks Monday night, plus a look at the Timberwolves three-point shooting to date and why I'm not all that concerned about their three-point shooting yet. We also saw a glimmer of hope related to that on Saturday night. So I want to go through some of those percentages, why that should bounce back, and more here today in the show. Welcome in. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked on Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. Happy Monday, everybody. Happy game day. The Wolves take on the Knicks this evening at Target Center. We'll talk all about it here later. I do want to preview that game, but plenty to get to first related to the weekend. The Wolves losing Friday, winning Saturday. What we can kind of take away from this weekend moving forward. And specifically, I want to talk three-point shooting in the Wolves offense. So we'll get to all that. First of all, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, Locked On Wolves is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube. And by the way, if you're watching on YouTube, yes, new background again. We're getting there. New house. Finally have the podcast, I guess, studio. We're working on it. So eventually we'll have more Timberwolves gear behind me. So that's the advantage to watching on YouTube, is you get to see, as apparently I'm touring some different places here lately to try and find the best setup and get it all ready to go. You can also, of course, listen on any audio platform that includes Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. And also the brand new Locked On Sports Minnesota app. If you have a Roku or if you have an Amazon Fire TV or Fire Stick, you can download Locked On Sports Minnesota. It's the app that has all the Locked On Minnesota shows, more great local sports coverage 24/7. It's absolutely free. Again, on Roku or Amazon Fire TV, just search for the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. And then finally, you can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves. And as you can see below me on the screen, if you're watching on YouTube, at Beecken, and that's with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right. Let's start with three-point shooting. So the Wolves last season, of course, were one of the league's, well, they weren't one of the league's necessarily best three-point shooting teams. They were top 10 for most of the year in terms of percentage, but they were number one in terms of three-point rate. I think they finished third in three-point attempts per game. And of course, the difference there is they played at the fastest pace of any team in the league, and therefore they had more possessions, which means that the actual attempts per game were way up. The attempt rate was slightly down. And yes, that's correct. They attempted 41.3 per game last year, which is the most per game. They had the third highest three-point attempt rate. They actually were number one in makes too, because they took so many. They finished 12th in percentage last season, 35.8%. So they were still, better than the median team in the league in terms of their three-point shooting. This year, they're only at 33.1%. In terms of attempts, they're 16th in rate, 12th in attempts per game. They're still playing fast. They're fourth in pace currently through the first 10 games, but they're 18th in makes. So that was a lot of numbers. Basically, they were 12th in percentage last season. They were third in rate. This year, they're 16th in rate, and they're 24th in percentage. So not only are they taking less threes, they're making less threes. The difference is roughly three made threes per game. You combine those two differences, taking less and making less in terms of percentage. That's about three less made threes per game. So do the math. That's 9 points per game less they're scoring just from beyond the arc. Now, the personnel has changed. That's clear. There's no Patrick Beverley. There's no Malik Beasley. Of course, Jared Vanderbilt wasn't really a factor. Although this year, by the way, he's actually shooting and making a few more threes. We did see that very early last season, and that kind of went away pretty quickly when teams really started daring him to consistently shoot corner threes. So we'll see if Vando can keep that up this season. But last year, Patrick Beverley, he shot 34% from three last year. He had been much better than that throughout his career. So last year was actually one of the worst three-point shooting seasons of his career, but he was actually below average last season. Malik Beasley was 37.7%, which was below where he'd been for his career. He was 41%, I think, for his career, just a shade under 40% coming into last season, like 39.9 or something like that. He shot 37.7. So both Malik and Beverley were below their career averages last season for the Wolves, and those are the guys primarily that are missing from the rotation. So it's not like, yeah, the personnel is different, but the guys who are going to shoot the most threes, Karl-Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards, D'Angelo Russell, those guys are all still on the team. Taurean Prince. Um, they added a guy who's a fringe rotation player that hasn't shot the ball well this year, but for his career as a 3-point really sharpshooter in Bryn Forbes. Kyle Anderson has been below league average, but doesn't take a ton of them. So really, you're just talking about guys that weren't in the rotation consistently last year that are now this year. It's Jalen Noel and Jordan McLaughlin are kind of the two that are being asked to shoot more than they did in the past because they have more of a defined role at this point in the season. Because last year, the McLaughlin role was basically Patrick Beverley early in the season. Even though Bev started, he was essentially the backup point guard most of the time with the second unit. And Noel eventually carved a role out, but he didn't have one early last season. And he's effectively taking the Malik Beasley role. We've talked about this before, different playing styles, but he's effectively that role, right? The bench two guard who comes in and scores. So yeah, those two guys are not shooting the ball as well, McLaughlin and Noel. But at least in the case of Noel, we can expect him to expect that percentage to tick upwards. He was 39.4% last year, which is almost 2 points better, 1.7 points better than Malik Beasley. The track record for Noel going back further, he shot the ball much better in the G League a couple of years ago. He shot the ball great in college. He was 39, 40% at Washington. So there's a track record of Noel shooting and scoring the ball. He's not going to finish this year 28.6% from three. He, again, last year was a better 3-point shooter than Malik Beasley and about 5 points better than Patrick Beverley. Jordan McLaughlin is not a sharpshooter. He's never been a sharpshooter. I don't think it's fair to assume that he will be. For his career, his first two seasons in the league, we're talking a total of 81 games over his rookie year and second year. He was 37% from three, 36.9%, which is just fine. That's a shade above league average. Last year, he was only 31.8%, so worse than Beverly. He's 13% so far this year. So I think we can count on Noel to improve that percentage. I don't know that we can say the same about McLaughlin. But again, the bar of 34% for Beverly last year isn't really, it's not unattainable, right? Because he was better than that the 2 years prior. McLaughlin was. So I worry less about those 3-point percentages coming around. And if you want to take that a step further, D'Angelo Russell, Karl-Anthony Towns, and Anthony Edwards, D'Lo and Cat are both shooting the ball much worse than last year. Last year, D'Lo was 34% from three, which, by the way, was his worst 3-point shooting percentage since 2018 when he was 21 years old. It was the year before his All-Star appearance in Brooklyn. He was 32% that year. This year, or last year, 34%, down from 38.7% the year before. This year, he's 27.8%. I think we could expect that to improve a little bit. Karl-Anthony Towns, we know, is down currently in terms of his 3-point shooting. He's at 36.5%. We know he's a career 40% guy. I'm going to pull exactly what he did last year. He was 41% last year, 39.6 for his career currently, including this year. So 36.5%. That's going to come up. That would be his lowest mark since his rookie season when he only shot 1 3 per game. So the Towns number will also come up. Ant is a bit of a different story. He's actually shooting the three better than he has thus far in his career. He's currently 36.7%. That's 1 point ahead of where he was last year. He's shooting slightly less this year from deep, which is fine because he's getting into the paint a bit more. And I'm not really worried about the Ant shot selection at this point, but it's more when he's shooting versus passing. That's a different conversation. All that to say, Ant's 3-point percentage is slightly higher. Cat and D'Lo, they're both going to come up. Jalen Noel's is going to come up. So the loss of Beverly and Beasley hurts, but if Noel ends up being just as good as he was last year, and obviously more attempts and more opportunity, and McLaughlin can be passable, then it's not really a big issue because some of these guys like D'Lo should be better than he was last year and so far this year anyway, right? Those numbers should continue to pull back up to where they have been for over the course of these guys' careers. So there's really no concern here. And I should also note the ball movement that we saw like Saturday, for instance, against the Rockets. Yeah, it was Houston. But I mean, they got off 33 threes, which is still less than they'd like to shoot, but they made 15 of them, 45.5% from three. Cat was 3 of 6. Ant was 2 of 5. Prince was 3 of 8. Naz Reid was 2 of 4. All these guys who are supposed to be making threes. Kyle Anderson made both of his attempts, which isn't going to happen all that often, but the ball movement led to better shots, which led to more made shots from the perimeter. And yes, the opponent had something to do with it, but it was a step in the right direction after shooting the ball miserably on Friday against Milwaukee, which, by the way, I want to go back to the Milwaukee game briefly and talk about that. If you missed the Friday night postcast, because we didn't do a full show after either one of those games, I want to go back to that briefly before we close the show by talking about the Knicks matchup on Monday night. First, though, let's talk about our title sponsors of today's show, and that is, of course, our friends over at Prize Picks. Monday night against the New York Knicks, I'm going to take Karl-Anthony Towns on Prize Picks to score more than his over-under, and I think I'll also take his rebounds over. I know he only had, I think, 9 boards on Saturday, but the Knicks, we'll talk about this in a minute, are going to be without Mitchell Robinson, who is one of the league's best offensive rebounders, one of the league's best shot blockers. So not having him in the mix, I think Cat's going to have a big game, both in terms of scoring and rebounds. If you haven't checked out Prize Picks, you need to. It's super easy to play, a lot of fun. Pick 2 to 5 players, and if they'll score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, it's more than just scoring, though. It's rebounds, assists, three-pointers made, steals, like pretty much every category is available there. And you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. You're not competing against other people like pros, for instance. It's just you versus the projections that are available, the over-unders. You can project, or you can Prize Picks offers projections on any sport, and you can cross sports too. So Sunday night, or actually Monday night, you could do Wolves, Towns, points and rebounds over. You could also take the Monday night game. I forget who's playing, but you could say, I think the Saints are playing. You could take like Alvin Kamara touchdowns over plus Cat points over and cross sports. You can make your entries in less than 60 seconds. It's extremely easy. Just download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up today and play daily fantasy sports. If you're a first-time user, you'll get a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. For instance, if you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Thanks again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen today. Now, for your second listen, go check out the Locked On Sports Today show. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, going back to Friday against the Milwaukee Bucks. The Timberwolves, I saw there was so we did the live postcast. If you're not familiar, after every Wolves game, I'll go live, usually about 45 minutes following the final buzzer, with Marty Gellner from Bally Sports North. And after she's done with that post game, we'll kind of recap the game in 12 to 15 minutes, give our biggest takeaways. And Friday, I talked a little bit on the postcast about how this was a game the Wolves could have won if they just made open shots. They were right in it. It could have gone either way. And Marnie and I kind of had a conversation surrounding that. And there was a comment on the postcast on YouTube over on the Locked On Sports Minnesota feed. And somebody said, basically, like, with the information available, it's laughable. You'd say they were in this game. They lost every quarter, et cetera, et cetera. Sure, they lost by 13. They did lose every quarter, except I guess they won the second by 1 point. So whatever. But, they lost the other quarters. The other 3 quarters, they were down by as many as, 24 in this game, maybe. But is that right? Were they down by that much in this game? I'm pulling it up now. 22. But it really did come down to, even though it was offensive urgency early in the game, right? And we talked about this on the postcast too, defensive urgency. The defense was okay, but there was a lack of urgency. There was, allowing too many second chance opportunities for the Bucks, not getting out in transition themselves because they weren't generating turnovers. The Bucks only turned it over 13 times in the game on Friday. And the lack of urgency early. But ultimately, when the Wolves got close late in the game, close-ish, they were down 2-3 possessions, really 3 possessions for most of the fourth quarter. The issue was missing open shots. And basically everyone on the team was culpable. Pretty much every starter. Down the stretch of this game, Karl-Anthony Towns missed a couple open threes. D'Lo was a major culprit here. Jalen Noel missed a couple of open threes. Jordan McLaughlin, Naz Reid, all these guys on Friday missed open shots. And if they hit those shots, this is probably a 1 or 2 possession game in the final couple minutes, and it comes down to the wire. And maybe the Wolves still lose. They probably still do. The Bucks are really good. They're well coached. They're undefeated. The Wolves struggled in a lot of areas on Friday. But the shooting, if they had just shot like they did, like, the quality of looks wasn't all that much worse on Friday than it was Saturday against the Rockets. Yes, I know Saturday was the Rockets. I know they shot 44% there and 27% against Milwaukee, a much, 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 much better defense on Friday. But the quality of looks wasn't that much better Saturday. Like, they were good on Friday. The Bucks, well, they locked down the paint and did a pretty good job in the paint. Most of the Wolves' three-point opportunities were relatively open. And the Wolves just simply missed. And that's another example of like of what we talked about in the first segment. It's going to bounce back, right? Cat, D'Lo, um, those are the two biggest ones because they ain't shooting the ball well. But Cat and D'Lo are going to bounce back. Noel's going to shoot better. It's generating those open looks, and we finally started to see that against the Bucks. Again, a very good defense, and we absolutely saw it for nearly 48 minutes. Other than like a quick third quarter swoon, where I think the Rockets got to within maybe 9 in the third quarter before the Wolves bumped it right, or they got to within 12, I guess. The Wolves got it right back up to 20, and ultimately as many as 24 before winning pretty easily against Houston. But to see it against a good opponent on Friday against the Bucks, again, not making the shots, but generating the open looks within the flow of the offense. And then on Saturday, again, we talked about this after the live postcast Saturday night. The secondary break coming out of transition, that secondary action, right? And if you're not familiar with that, basically if you don't get a good look right away in transition, if you don't get a fast break dunk or layup or an open three in transition, it's that secondary action, whether it's to the trailer or it could be a drag screen and picking a drag screen in transition as a secondary action, right? It's flowing from transition into, usually you're not going transition into a set offensive play, right? You're flowing into secondary break actions, and every team's got different things they like to go to. For the Wolves, obviously, it's a lot of, if D'Lo's got the ball in his hands, it's a lot of drag screens in the open floor. But the Wolves were doing that, and they were slipping some screens. They were swinging the ball to the other side of the floor, and just trying to set up these actions to get into, like, get a good shot in what's still mostly a broken floor situation. It's not a half court set off a made bucket or a timeout. It's going from a full on fast break, pulling the ball out and going into secondary when there's a little bit of a broken floor situation to a secondary action. And the Wolves did that really well on Saturday against the Rockets. So to see combining some good moments against the Bucks on Friday with a really strong effort on Saturday against admittedly an inferior opponent in Houston, and certainly an opponent much worse than the Milwaukee team the Wolves faced Friday, that's extremely encouraging. And now they take on the New York Knicks Monday, who are going to be without Mitchell Robinson. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And the Knicks are a 1 game under 500, so have had roughly, actually, you look at their schedule, and we're going to in a second, it breaks out not too dissimilar from what the Wolves have done so far. So a winnable game against a team in a similar spot and a team that is underperforming expectations. And then a couple of tough games this week. But assuming Rudy Gobert comes back at some point later this week, if the Wolves continue to show the growth they did late Friday in the game against the Bucks in somewhat of a comeback, and then Saturday in the win over the Rockets, they'll be in a good spot moving forward. And we'll finally start to see this thing turn around offensively for the Wolves. They're still, sitting here right now, coming into the Knicks game Monday, the Wolves are still 20th in offensive rating. I think they were 23rd before they won Saturday. So still a bottom 10 team in terms of offensive rating. They're still top 10 in defensive rating. So I think we'll see those even out a little bit. And for the time being, if depending on how long Gobert's out, and then Gobert will come back, hopefully the offense is up to where it needs to be. And acclimating Rudy, I think we've talked a lot about that. We'll talk more about it another day. It's not for right now. Acclimating Rudy is going to have to be a priority to keep that offensive rating high, but the defensive rating should stay top 10 once Rudy Gobert is back in the lineup. All right, let's close by talking Wolves-Knicks, talking matchup, injuries, etc., what to expect from this game. We're going to do all that here next. All right, Wolves-Knicks Monday night. This is I don't actually know why this game is an 8:15 start. It's in Minnesota. There must be a reason for why this is an 8:15 start. If anyone knows, I'd be curious to know what it is. Anyway, the Wolves play the Knicks at 8:15 Monday night. And I, as far as I can tell, it's not a national TV game either. I don't even think it's NBA TV. So it really is. It doesn't matter really, but it's puzzling to me why this would be an 8:15 start. But at any rate, at Minnesota, it's the Knicks. The Knicks to this point in the season are 4-5, and they won 3 in a row earlier this year. Then they lost 3 in a row. They've lost 4 out of 5. But you look at their wins, you look at their losses. The teams they've lost to are all really good teams. 4 of the 5 are really good teams, and all going to be playoff teams most likely. Memphis, they lost opening night to Memphis in overtime. They lost at Milwaukee. They lost at Cleveland. Both fantastic teams. I think combined one loss to this point, Milwaukee and Cleveland. They lost at home to Atlanta, which is easily their worst loss. It wasn't all that close. And then they lost by 15 to Boston on Saturday night. So they're 4-5. The teams they've beaten, they beat Detroit, they beat Orlando, and they beat Charlotte. Three of the worst teams in the league thus far. The Charlotte win was overtime. And then they beat Philadelphia, which was a nice win on Friday night by a bucket at Philly. So by 2 points. So they're 4-5. They've beaten basically one good team in a close game. They've beaten three teams they should have beaten. And 4 of their 5 losses have come against teams that they surely were underdogs in and weren't expected to win. Not too dissimilar from the Wolves. Now, of course, the Wolves were favored in basically all the games they've lost, except for, I think, the Phoenix game. But all those teams that they've lost to have actually turned out to be pretty good so far this season, regardless of what the preseason expectations were. The records for, the Utahs and I'm blanking, but all the other teams that they've lost to already that we thought they should have beaten, San Antonio twice, right? Those records are much better than anyone would have expected. So all that to say, the Knicks come to Minnesota on Monday night for what really should be a game that the Wolves will be favored in. And with no Mitchell Robinson for the Knicks, the Wolves have a real opportunity. Mitchell Robinson, to this point, leads the league in block rate this season. He's also number 3 in offensive rebound rate league-wide. So it's a really big deal that Mitchell Robinson's not available for this game for the Knicks. In terms of team metrics, the Knicks are really middle of the pack in a lot of areas. They're 13th in pace. They're 17th in offensive rating. They're 17th in defensive rating. They don't do anything like extremely well on offense. They don't shoot a ton of threes. They're 25th in 3-point percentage. They don't really get to the free throw line. They're 25th in free throw rate offensively. On defense, they're dead last in turnover rate, so they're not forcing turnovers. They're 25th in defensive rebound rate. They don't foul a lot. That's about the only thing you can really say. They block a fair amount of shots too. But again, with no Mitchell Robinson, there's not much there you should be all too worried about in the paint. Like Julius Randle is not blocking your shot, most likely. Isaiah Hartenstein, of course, formerly of the Clippers, I think will start in Robinson's place. I believe he started the other night for the Knicks. And he is a good shot blocker and a solid rebounder. He's not Mitchell Robinson, but he's the one guy you got to look out for in the paint with no Robinson. But Ant should be able to have his way. The perimeter defense for this team is spotty. I mean, like you've got Jalen Brunson out there now for the Knicks, of course. But he's somebody the Wolves could take advantage of off the dribble. Obviously Derrick Rose, kind of the same thing at this point in his career. There's not a ton of real strong perimeter defenders. Emmanuel Quickley and Cam Reddish are fine, but the Wolves should be able to get dribble drive penetration from Ant. And once in the paint, especially if Hartenstein's not on the floor, there shouldn't be too much concern about getting a shot blocked in the paint. Also, as I mentioned, the Knicks don't foul a lot. The Wolves aren't getting to the line quite enough this year anyway, especially with no Rudy Gobert. It's going to be all on Ant and Cat to get to the line. And D'Lo's got to be judicious with his shot selection. This is, again, a matchup like whether it's Jalen Brunson or Derrick Rose or whoever ends up matching up against him, he should be able to get his shot off when and where he wants, but he's got to be smart. And we saw D'Lo play a little bit better Saturday. He scored 7 points in the first quarter. He was leaps and bounds better than he played Friday, even if the final box score, I think he had 10 and 6 or something. Wasn't like a sexy line in the box score. But he was more efficient and he was better with his decision-making. He was more aggressive defensively. If that version of D'Lo comes to play, and if Cat and Ant get into the paint and are aggressive, this is a team the Wolves should beat on Monday night, especially at home. Each team has the same amount of rest. The Knicks are traveling in. This is a winnable game for Minnesota, most certainly. So this is an important one also to get, because if you peek ahead at the schedule, things don't get easier for the Wolves the rest of the week. They have Memphis upcoming. I think that's actually the next game. I believe that's Wednesday's game is the Grizzlies. No, I'm sorry. They have Phoenix again Wednesday, Memphis on Friday at Memphis. So Knicks at home Monday, get 8:15 tip, Phoenix on Wednesday, and then at Memphis Friday, and then at Cleveland. So these next 4, the Knicks are probably the only game they're going to be favored in. And then you go on the road for Cleveland, Orlando, Philadelphia. 2 of those 3, they're going to be underdogs in as well. And then Miami. So it's about to get tougher. Rudy Gobert, by the way, is also listed as out Monday. So no Mitchell Robinson, no Rudy Gobert, most likely. I believe if he tests negative twice on Monday, he could play Monday night. But if he tested positive Friday or Saturday or whatever, that seems unlikely. So Wednesday seems like a reasonable, assuming there's no side effects or not side effects, symptoms persisting symptoms for Rudy. There's a chance he could play Wednesday against the Suns. So hopefully that's the case. Of course, after the game against the Knicks on Monday, we'll do the live postcast with Marnie Gellner. So roughly 45 minutes after the game. So I don't know, 11:30-ish. You can find that live on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube. And then after the fact, on all the Locked On Wolves audio channels or on the Locked On Minnesota YouTube channel as well. And then we'll do the full the full post-game podcast we'll post early on Tuesday as well. So be sure to check that out on Tuesday. A big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. It's greatly appreciated. And of course, you can watch on YouTube or listen on any of your favorite audio platforms. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken, and that's with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. The Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Thanks again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen. And for your next listen, be sure to check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. The biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.